At the end of the day, business is a competition. You'll always have enemies out there. You'll always have problems. The most important thing a new business must do is put the layers in, like constructing a house. Put the foundations in that you never need to go back and undo the foundations.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of World of Oil Derivatives. I'm Greg Newman, the Chief Executive of Onyx Capital Group. Today is a slightly special episode. We've got John Beckwith with us, who is the Chief People Officer at Onyx. A very recent hire, but a very experienced hire. He's been through thick and thin with a lot of different companies, public companies, private companies, big, small, but mostly big, right? Mostly thriving companies, but just a wealth of experience. Now, for me, I wanted to get John on because, one, introduce him to the world, right? I mean, I'm very proud of the hire, and we're making big moves here at Onyx with more C-suite hires and the rest of it, got big aspirations. But I think people talk a lot about culture, and when they want to hear about it, they want to hear about people and people philosophy. And I've always been interested in it as well, but I would say that John is the first person I've ever met who is so decisive with his views on people in the workplace, and marrying that with workplace and high performance cultures and bringing that into a formulaic process that can actually be used to thrive a growing business is something, is really resonates with Onyx and what it's all about. So thanks, John, for coming on. And
my pleasure. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to work at Onyx, because it's been, I would say, amazing from day one. And I mean that very sincerely to you, because everything you told me when we first met about the pulse and the energy, you weren't lying. It's very serious here. And so thank you for this opportunity.
Great. But John, just for everyone else, can we do a bit of a look on your career? So you started off at a hedge fund, is that right?
Well, actually private equity.
Okay.
At the early days. So first thing is, I had no desire to get involved in HR. In fact, back in the day, it wasn't even called that. The colloquial term was personnel. It's very unfashionable. But I worked for a private equity firm, and the genius that ran that firm said, if you want to be good in business, you've got to understand people. And I had probably the best education of people investing in businesses and transforming them, increasing their value demonstrably, all through the personnel choices that they took. Difficult choices, keeping people, developing people, adding new people. All these decisions were so important to observe from a young man coming through and being educated.
But you could see straight away that people was the most important thing in these private equity companies, buying stakes in companies, is to get the people right.
Nothing gets done without human beings. Their will to help, their will not to help. It's so complicated to run a company with, let's say more than 10 employees, or you get to a size where you can't even know everybody's first name because it gets very substantial in size, and it's a complex puzzle. And I think any chief exec who underestimates the complexity of running a workforce is going to have serious problems. When I met you, the first thing you spoke about was right to the heart of the issue, is I've got to get the right people to grow my company. So I've been very fortunate in my career to work with chief execs who understand that and also have no clue about it and make some monumental mistakes, which I've had to mop up. So the key reason why I joined Onyx is because I think within our first 60 seconds of conversation, you were right on the button about this whole issue, and it was very refreshing. But my career has predominantly been in financial services. Had a short stint in a tech firm for 2 years. Frankly, I thought that would be a completely different experience. It's the same issues. I don't think whatever industry you go into, it's the same matters that you have to confront.
And is it different matters out of interest when companies are at different stages of their growth trajectory or size, or let's say performance level? Could you identify, someone at a stage that maybe was growing but has plateaued or even started to decline, and it's quite predictive what the people issues are, even without knowing that business? Do you think it's that formulaic to you now? Or?
In my own experience, for what it's worth, I mean, it's 32 years worth of experience. You see all sorts of things, and then you start to see patterns. And in my direct observation, it all emanates from the top. If the top professionals, the top management have the ambition to really push their enterprise forward, even if it's going through a difficult time, but they have this very opportunistic, very venturesome attitude to grow an enterprise, to push, it just energizes it and ignites the whole company, no matter where that company is within its trajectory, good or bad. In my experience, having sat right inside the king and queen's tent, I have seen the difference between a company just by the top management. And frankly, I've even seen successful businesses being destroyed because of the people running it. I've seen a business that's struggling turn itself around just because of the people at the top, because of the ideas, the innovation, their use of capital, their access to the employees. They're very engaged, they're very involved, they're very consistent with their formula of how to be successful. And I've seen other people take the most precious business and destroy it.
And what, just out of interest, down to go into exact details, but what happened there?
Complacency kills. Just assuming that every year you're going to have this yield from the business that's just there whenever you want it to be, and not realizing that every firm has the same problem. You have a new accounting year, you reset back to zero, you've got to start it all over again. If you get really good in your field and you become dominant, then you're the enemy, and people will find weaknesses in you and they'll outcompete you. It's almost it's a perpetual state of anxiety. That you're constantly improving the business, and the moment you become complacent, even in sport, if you get lazy, you find that's where the problems occur.
The immediate counter to that, I think people would say, is like, that's where I thought it was going as well. This constant state of anxiety. People don't like the sound of that, but as in, I guess your first principle of work is it's not a vacation, right? At the end of the day, you've got to be here, and it is kind of designed to be stressful, and it's survival of the fittest. So I think that principle in itself, I would argue from what you're saying, the people who don't see it that way tend to be in managed decline mode. Right? You can probably sense that straight away.
I think as a chief exec, I said to you that I think being a chief exec is the loneliest position in the company, because for every decision you get right, they say, well, that's his job. If you get a decision wrong, there's a million skeptics saying I would have done it this way. It's a bit like people watching a sporting match or something and just standing there criticizing. But when you're in the hot seat yourself, and I think the hardest thing with the chief exec, in my opinion, is getting the right information upon which to make the right decisions. And I think the danger is that you get people around you that stop telling you the truth. They start telling you things you want to hear. And in a business which is under pressure to grow, the only thing you have is the truth. But when you start getting sycophants around you telling you things which are all good, all rosy, even down to things like, Greg, I'll deliver this for you, I promise, and I never do. That's a lie. You should never promise things to a chief exec unless you can deliver it. We can't do that to customers. We can't do that to shareholders. But it's like, well, I'll just tell that person that information to get them off my back. And hopefully you'll forget.
I was going to say a lot of it's driven by fear.
Well, yeah, but that's what a good HR professional recognizes, that as I said, the only thing you have is the truth. And the truth doesn't care about your feelings. It just cares with the accuracy of the situation. And when you're working with serious chief execs who've got serious amount of responsibility, they need to have unfiltered, correct information, which is what you and I talk about. Is what is the truth here?
Well, I think, as you said about sport, every kind of instance I can think of immediately in my head about a sport team that's turned it around, or a business or whatever. It does come back to some quite simplistic things at the end of the day, standards, and you talk about the truth. But I think something that's difficult with growing companies, obviously you can speak to this, is that the transitioning and people's attitude towards that transition. You're a small business and everyone talks to each other, and then it grows, and then there needs to be layers, and some people don't like that, right? We've talked about that before. But ultimately, when you want to cycle things up, or you want people to communicate, or you don't want people to be sycophants around the chief executive, let's just say, it's still difficult to get that right, because you've got a balance of, you want the anxiety and fear to some extent to be pushing people, but you don't want it to be too far the other way, which is anyone can just say whatever they want and feel like they can just walk up to a senior management and say, oh yeah, how's it going, mate? How's your weekend? Like, or whatever, that kind of over familiarity. And also that kind of feedback can be quite, you've got to calibrate that feedback. It's like someone just says, well, I don't think that's very good. I mean, who is saying that? And in an environment where you want the truth, sometimes I think, do I actually want the truth? Because sometimes people just believe what they want to believe, and I've got to calibrate who's saying it, what's behind what they're saying. I just don't want random people telling me about their random opinions about the business and random different things. So how do you calibrate that, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Well, there's a huge dichotomy between someone's opinion and the truth. Often someone just telling you honestly how they feel is not in itself the truth. It's just how they feel about a situation. You and I spoke about role, and the word role needs to be taken very carefully. You have a part to play in a business. You have a part to play, and I have a part to play. In essence, it's a custodian of responsibility. It's something you take on in the same way as a parent does. You have a responsibility. And it's not about whether you're happy in that role or how you feel. It's about being useful. It's being reliable. And part of that, of being useful and reliable, is being able to put together the information in a way that's not biased. You can provide an account of something. The trouble is, when you run a business, is people are telling you what they feel, what they think. But often it's their difficulty of being able to reconcile what's going on. The most important thing is to have information which is objectively verifiable. When a chief exec...
I was going to say evidence-based.
Well, a chief exec turns around to you. Best question chief execs ask is, what do you base that on? Explain it to me. And people say, oh, it just is. And you go, well, these people are telling me X. These people have said it. You say, well, just explain it to me. And for some reason, people get hurt by that question. Right. But if you're correct, why would you be embarrassed? It's the evidence that must be provided to you must be incontrovertible. The people must be explaining to you where they've got the information, because you're going to make a decision on that. And if you make a wrong decision is often not knowing two things. One, the information that you got is questionable, or two, people didn't assess the downstream liability. They just gave you a snapshot of their view of what was going on. That's not truthful. That's just their opinion. So I said there's a huge distinction between people just waxing lyrical, just speaking up and saying what they want, versus presenting it in a manner where you can make decisions. It's a different level. It's a different standard of quality.
I think that is really interesting, and just in and of itself. But how do you do that? I guess what you're telling me and what I've seen you do, there's a level of professionalism, essentially, especially in startups growing to small companies, growing to medium companies. That professionalism trajectory, which can sometimes be very quick, which I think has happened at Onyx. You go so fast, you don't know if everyone's kept up, and you don't know if everyone's seeing it the same way. So you talk about roles, but a year ago, this person's role was this, and then suddenly a year later, it's either diminished or it's way higher. And is everyone respecting that, the burden of that role or the responsibilities of that role and what it means? That is I have to empathize with people. That is quite difficult, right? To suddenly be like, well, 1 minute you're hands-on and you're working with me. Next minute you're my senior manager and I have to watch what I say around you. That is, you can understand, quite difficult to transition into. But I guess the right people do it and do have an awareness of what's going on and how it's growing. But undeniably, that's a challenge, and you must have seen that quite a few times. No,
I mean, this is my view. Again, for what it's worth, is perhaps unsavory, if not slightly controversial. It's dangerous to put people into a position that has responsibilities to it, where the incumbent has not got credentials previously of being able to show they can handle that level of responsibility. I'm all for giving people opportunity and stretch assignments, but when we're getting serious about growing a business, if you and I were going on an expedition together, we'd want to assemble the most qualified professional people to know what the hell they're doing.
Can I just counter that? Because I do agree, but just to counter devil's advocate argument, the private equity model, which is we're going to come in, we're experts, we're going to basically go hire a recruiter to go and find experts with this track record and plonk them into a system and say, it's going to work and we're all going to work within this rigid structure. I personally hate that model, because it's like, just because you got a track record, and I've been in private equity situations, didn't end up having private equity investing in the business, but I see the way they operate. And, here's this guy who could be your chairman brought in, and he talks and, I've been brought in, I've got all this experience and this is my opinion. I'm like, this guy doesn't know anything about our business, or girl doesn't know anything about our business. And not only that, there's things going on here. There's there's the ego from being brought in from private equity. There's the I'm here to solve things type attitude, which is condescending, which I don't like working with. And there's all these things going on. So just saying I've got a track record, I'm challenging you just to say, even though I agree, I think, and I know I'm rambling here, but I would take it slightly differently, which is how can you sell yourself best? So it might be that you don't have a CV that says I worked here, then I worked here, then I worked here, but you might be able to tell a very convincing story with evidence of how within your role you were able to demonstrate responsibility and demonstrate that the growth of maturity and the growth of your personality can handle the next level. So I would say that what people struggle with is that part. They go, because you can on the flip side say, yeah, but I've worked there for 5 years. I know how this works. You're like, yeah, but you're shit. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean just.
I mean, this is again where people may disagree, but wrapped up inside that competence model, they have to be personally competent, not just technically and through experience. Just because they've worked somewhere else, it doesn't by definition say that's it, they're ready to go and they can come into a company like Onyx and just say what the hell they want and do what they want. They're not heroes. What they're there to do, if they're any good, is to respect where you've come from. And that's part of what you and I talk about with the humility. Anyone that comes in here parading their background or masquerading as a genius is nothing more than a charlatan, because the first thing a proper genius will do is always downgrade themselves. They will never put themselves as particularly...
You're saying the best person you've seen have imposter syndrome?
Oh, massively. In my experience, that, not that they go too far with it, but I think that is quite admirable in a person, that they do not showcase themselves. I think it's a sign that they take their industry or profession very seriously.
But isn't it also a sign of awareness, as in like a genius, like you say, knows how much they don't know?
100%. Is that they just get depressed in the fact that that when they thought they just cracked it, there's another plethora of information out there that they've got to start all over again. Most people are content just knowing a little. A real professional, in my experience, just this never-ending conquest, more information. And that's where the arrogance comes in. I think anyone that comes into Onyx and believes that they can instantly add has overrated themselves. The first, even my own experience, 32 years, I've come in here feeling like a baby, because how can I know everything? I can utilize some of the experience I have, and in many ways it gives me confidence to be able to give you quick answers because I know what works practically. But the respect for this business is inordinate. How could I understand every permutation of this company? If you and me hire anybody who thinks they can just come in and bolt on and know it all and take what they learn in a different company with a different ideology even, and just say, I can make a difference I don't need to learn anything new, is in my opinion, is vulgar. It's just disrespectful to the company, and we shouldn't. And actually, a headhunter's job is not just to plonk a CV into the company. Their job is to sell us, our narrative, and to make sure that the person lines up with that. They share the same. We have a mutual goal.
But we've also, because we create our own consistent view on business and a view on how it should run, but it might be completely wrong, right? But at the same time, what else can you do? You have to create ultimately a discretionary view of how a business should run based on evidence as much as you can and based on your own experiences. But at the end of the day, it's going to be an ideology that you need to form, and you just need to challenge it. But I guess that's the awkward thing, is that what works for some people works for another. Like, we've got competitors. I look at them and I'm like, you run the business very, very differently, but you've had some good results or similar results. So it's confusing, but then I don't want to be arrogant and say there's only one way to do this. So what works for some people might not work for another. So I guess that's the other point to this. What I've learned is it's to create an objective ideology that has worked and is proven to work and is a formula. And you yourself might not fit into it at times, and you need to kind of raise your game because that's what you've set. But I think it's okay to not fit into that. And I think that what I've seen is there are much more, I can have conversations a lot more amicably about people who are rising in the business or people who are coming in externally in, where it's definitely not personal. It's just, we've created something that works and we have to respect the formula because this is the formula that will work. We have to explain it to the public one day. If we're a public company, we have to be true to that. Can't make it about one individual or like a subjective thing. And I think that's potentially difficult for people to understand, but I think you can have amicable discussions being like, I actually don't think this is going to fit into this model. We're saying we want people to do X, Y, Z, and that's just not your game. So where I've definitely failed in the past is tried to make accommodations for people that you actually know it's not really going to work. But I just can't help myself with the speed mentality, being like, yeah, but if they come in, it's going to make this go from here to here. But you're just delaying an inevitable awkward scenario down the line. But how do you feel about that? Sometimes it's necessary or it's not. I wish you should always 100% stick to your principles. Do you see what I mean?
Well, there are different negotiations that take place according to where the business is in its growth. I think a startup business or a newly formed business or an early business, it's really hard because you don't have the track record. Look, everybody wants to be part of a successful business. It's very hard to recruit people who make it a successful business. When you've got a dominant brand, I've seen it myself, sat trying to hire people or retain people or even push them along further within the company with a weak or unknown brand, versus a very, blue ribbon brand everybody wants to work for. The inbox is congested with people wishing to work for you. They just want to put that name on their CV.
Right.
And they don't really need to hear a lot about the company. So I think the owner of a small business has a much bigger task on his or her hand to encourage someone to join, stay, and develop. But the argument shifts when you've got an established brand. And I think recognizing that the way you talk to people at various stages of the company's evolution, you just need to adapt. It's all about adapting. But when you come down to sacrificing, people ask me at interview, it's the most vulgar question. I hate it. They don't even know why they're asking it. They don't even know often how to deal with an answer. It's too broad. What's your company culture like? And I just say, look, if you can explain the question to me, or even explain your own company's culture, then I'll have a go at explaining ours, because we're going to need more than 10 seconds. But the important thing is, in my view, is that you take your highest value employee, whatever that constitutes. What is the highest value employee according to a company standard? What does that high value employee have to do to be fired? And if the standard is, well, I have to break the law, then you've got hardly any real cultural value, because they can do what the hell they want. Because conversely, a low value employee would just make one mistake and they'll probably be out in seconds. But I think the best way to look at it is, what does the elite employee have to do where wrong for the company to say, no matter what, we will not tolerate that. And it has to be greater than a legal system standard. When you build a business that stands on 3-4 foundational factors that says we will never compromise this ever for anyone,
so
including
it's company
ourselves.
law. It's your own company law.
I used the word yesterday, honor. The firm will not stand for anything that goes against their honor. And that's really important in a business, and not being, I think, manipulated in a relationship that, according to someone, the value of an employee, they can do what the hell they want.
I would say part of, and again, this is going to sound arrogant, but part of the success journey, you do get that manipulation that is hard to see until you look back. And I think it's inevitable. People can't help themselves, right? A lot of it is people's subconsciouses working against themselves. Do you remember you were saying the thing about the chief executive role, or kind of any senior management role, is it's not about you, it's about the role and what that means to that person. For some people, they love hierarchy. Some people have authority problems. It might be something to do with their parents that they're holding on to, that they see an authority figure as that. And it can create a dynamic that is just to do with the role, and it's just to do with authority. That was really interesting when you said that. And I think that has kind of almost been a parent relationship, like throughout, looking back at it. And there's no right answer, right? You do need to create almost your own law, which is what you're saying, right? And you have to honor that law. And surely the people who fail are the people who don't respect their own laws, don't respect their own principles and values, as they're called. Yeah,
I have seen, especially in a tough time, right? There's an expression I was told years ago when I worked in a smaller company many, many years back. They said, look, anyone can hold the helm on a calm sea, all right?
Yeah.
So, but in rough times or difficult times, which is where decision-making jumps up to a different level, it's having those foundational, if you like, tenets that keep you real, where you won't allow your ego or your misjudgment to creep in, that you keep everyone rooted. It's just at the heart of survival, keep your stuff together. And I've seen, I've been very blessed in the sense that I've been around, not close, right in the thick of some incredibly heated and uncomfortable situations. Companies that have had their share price, plummet, not just overnight, but like it's free fall. And literally the board sitting around saying, 24 hours ago, the perception of us was pretty good. Today we are absolutely the scrap heap territory. What's gone wrong? To keep a board and a bunch of managers to make effective decisions, coherent decisions, they at least need to be rooted by some very foundational standards. And because otherwise people get distressed and make all sorts of crazy calls. People don't like that type of environment. The best chief execs I've seen, they are calm under pressure. You take any elite sport or profession, take a surgeon, take a pilot, take a Formula One driver, take anything. It's their calmness, despite the fact that around them is chaos.
Like almost crave it in a way.
Yeah.
I think I've seen, and that's what I was going to move on to, the best leaders, I'd say, because high performers, it's interesting. I think a lot of people are interested in what makes a high performer, but usually what I see is they're a great high performer in isolation. I think leadership to me is a more developed set of skills, and not just chief executives, but general leaders in the firm, of which I think everyone should strive to be a leader in some form. What, in your experience, makes the best leaders?
The articulation of the destination, being specific, not broad, in what the journey point is or the stages are. If you are too broad, too scant, too vague to employees, it's not very settling. Being specific, being exact, having the skill to articulate, having the ability to rationalize why that's the place that's beneficial. and explaining the implications of that as well. Any exquisite communicator, I mean, without flattering you too much, you are extremely good at communication. And I noticed that within the first 60 seconds of meeting with you. But it is, in my experience, having seen at least 12 chief execs working very closely with them, their ability to have the exacting details of what the future looks like and what we need to do to achieve it.
So decisive and communicate that well.
Highly informative.
What if you're a slightly, mid-level employee, but still a manager? You still need to be a strong leader. And is it exactly the same principles, but just in a micro scale? Or?
Yes, of course. It's just a mini version of it. Or a derivative of it. It's certainly not. It certainly must not be. There must be no disjunction between what the chief exec is setting out to achieve for the business, not just to survive, but to thrive. There's a big difference. Survival and thriving, to outgun all of the competition. Everybody in that management team has got to be understanding of the script, and that's where I see all the problems going wrong. There is this huge discord between what is spoken about, certainly in large companies at the very top level, and then you talk down through the various managerial levels, there's this almost different language. And also there's a lot of people saying, I don't believe in it, and they actually do it against what they're trying to achieve.
Also want to talk about, because you can get ready-made leaders. You've got the evidence like we were talking before, but the ones we want to nurture into being leaders, I'm a big fan of that, because that's been my upbringing. I look at especially where we are right now, the teams out there, and I know they've got such good raw ingredients here and there, and they're willing to be molded, but maybe some of them just do not have the natural ability to be leaders. And there's, you can talk about that to death, but is there an element of you that believes that you can kind of force anyone to be a leader or mold anyone into a leader, or do you think it's a completely natural thing?
I think to me it's a contradiction in terms to ask someone to be a leader. Their whole personality, their whole drive is to jump on opportunity.
But the problem with that, John, I'm with you, but what I think people struggle with is, well, how come you're in that role? And then how come you're now rising in this business? Let's say you were neck and neck with someone at a level in a business, and suddenly they're rising because they have leadership ability. Now, that's not necessarily a competence thing, but it's very hard to rationalize when someone starts to, double your salary, let's say, because they're able to lead. Whereas you feel like you're as good as, if not a lot better, competency wise. Again, I can empathize why that's a struggle. And if you try, you go, okay, fine, I acknowledge, I got the accountability and the awareness to say, I acknowledge that I need these skills to add leadership to my criteria to be able to grow in this company and be, at the very top if I can be, or at least as far as I can get. But yet face the realities that you can't. I wouldn't put that on someone. I would say, I think, like what we talked about recently, I can't help the people who are already molded, but the people who are here, I think they deserve my time. They deserve management time to at least inform them of what it looks like in our experience and what has worked, and then set the foundation saying, if you nail these things as simplistically as I can, and you do these things, and we'll work with you to do these things, you can be a leader. Or do you just think, why are you even trying? The leaders will rise to the top and you'll know.
Yeah, I wouldn't want it to come across that it's just a free-for-all. Yeah. And because what you get potentially is backstabbing and improper conduct. I mean, the word leader in itself needs to be defined very carefully. It can mean different things to different people, but let's take it to at least one element, which is you can take on responsibility for the work of others. And you're a sufficiently good role model that people will want to listen to you and they will respect you, and you're a sort of person that can be relied upon. I mean, that's a pretty elementary standard, but in my experience, sometimes that's quite hard to ask for. It's not to be associated with, I think, sort of acknowledging that they are promotion material. I think the point about leadership is it it manifests itself in different ways. Some people can be very quiet and very almost introvert, but they're very good leaders. And other people are very aggressive or loud or brash, and they actually can cheese everyone off. The leader will suit, most of all, the style that suits the group that they're working with. I think knowing your audience, reading the room, understanding the people you're working with, analyzing everything. You and I spoke about this, being ruthlessly introspective, analyzing everything. That's what leaders do. But I have seen it take on rather horrendous forms, that people are just loud and bossy and just tell everyone else to do the work. That's not a leader. That's a tyrant.
And do you see a lot of that in corporations out of interest?
Yes, because those organizations often reward that type of behavior. And in my experience, it leads to a big problem, because a lot of people don't appreciate that running a workforce, ultimately, these employees, all of us as employees, there are perfectly good laws out there to protect that relationship. And it's very important that the way employees are dealt with don't cause problems further ahead in terms of employment litigation. So having a bold, brash, aggressive, disrespectful manager, it not only is it create a pernicious effect to the company, but it can also cause liability issues. I mean, I have found, unbelievably so, that there are employees that look for that type of thing in order to bring what I call, the chasing the ambulance claims, that if just the way they're spoken to is perceived to be disrespectful or condescending, or they think their managers or leaders being too hard on them, they'll just turn it against the company. So I think the most important thing of a leader is to really cultivate, is a stronger word, cultivate the team, and create a pack. I mean, let's put it this way, to create a pack, a tribe, a unit, an impenetrable tribe, a team that will work together. And that's really hard to do. I would say the number one thing that's missing in most companies that I've worked in, there again, I've seen it work in a superlative fashion in certain companies, where they build this teamwork. And teamwork is another word that's often misunderstood, but this massive collaboration, where people actually want to come to work, they actually want to get stuck in. They find that there's a tremendous productive value in contributing. They rely on each other. People are just very straight with each other, and it's quite self-selecting, that team. But that's what a leader does, is he or she fosters that from zero. But I've dealt with teams that there's disharmony, there's resentment.
And I can't help, when you were talking there, I just can't help but think it is simple. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's simple.
It's very hard to do.
If you have a clear mission and goal, like, there's classic things like, how would you stop the world fighting with each other? Well, if you had some like extraterrestrial, war or whatever, everyone would band together and they would cut all the bullshit and they would work together and they'd stop messing around just to achieve that goal. So when you say it comes from the top, I think that's like quite well defined now, because if it's that strong of a mission, that clear of a mission, and everyone's engaged in that mission, everything will basically take care of itself, to the point where people will actually accept that people to the left or right of them are going to be better at certain things. And actually, they might be the best person to take charge. And I've had this conversation with my dad, funny enough, about how we programmed. And I believe we're programmed to want leaders. And I think people are programmed to be leaders. But he thinks completely the opposite. And it's always an interesting discussion. And maybe as we've evolved, we need to this need for leaders and less need to move in herds. I think that's what people are trying to do, right? Well, think for yourself. Don't just allow yourself to be brainwashed by propaganda. That's a theme in this day and age. But I think we can't help as humans but want to be in those different roles or not be in those different roles and follow. And I think that it's still a challenge for people to accept or thrive in that situation. But I have seen, even myself, none of that matters when there's a clear goal. And actually, like you were saying, that's the positive thing. And anyone can steer a ship when it's going some way. But I've noticed people who are talking shit, who are arguing with each other, causing issues. As soon as it goes badly, there's a very few people who want to step up and go, come on, let's deal with this. Even to get all primal about it. It's like in a fight, everyone's big talking on a night out. Well, suddenly there's a dramatic issue. Who is the person that actually stands up at the front and gets the team going and says, well, we're going to stand up and fight here, or whatever, that kind of thing. That I'll be honest, I've seen that multiple times because I've been in a startup environment. We've had catastrophic failures. We've bounced back. We've had investor issues. We've had, back in my last place, loads and loads of issues. And it's always in those times where you can tell subconsciously, you'll kind of acknowledge, we see where people lie now. And that acknowledgement is very healthy, I think, because later on, they'll come back and say, it's obvious that you're in the role. Don't take the piss with it. Don't be condescending to me. Don't think you're better than me, whatever. But I can see that that's where you belong and this is where I belong, which is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's just the true nature of it. And that's my personal opinion, but I think maybe controversial. Would you agree?
No, it's not controversial. Yeah. I think that unfortunately you don't find out about these things until there's rough seas.
Yeah.
Even your own friends in life, family, even that they let you down when you need them the most, and so it's a test. If you're an idiot, if you continue to overlook it, once you see a sign of it, you should be very cognizant that that's probably going to recur. So the important thing is competition. At the end of the day, business is a competition. You've got this exercise to generate as much revenue, and the differential between the income and the revenue is one of the biggest determinants of success, profit. And it's really hard because there's lots of other companies all trying to do the same thing. And in my view, getting a bunch of people together to understand what your competitive advantage is, or to even to create one, and to help you build it, you'll always have enemies out there. You'll always have problems. I think it's just reality. The hard thing in a company, and this is what I would say is the most telling experience I've had, is here's a high, not Onyx specifically, but any firm that sort of depersonalize it. You're haunted by your personnel choices. You can end up putting the wrong people in a hurry because the business is growing at rapid speed, but they've actually been a problem for the company at some point. And I would say the most important thing a new business must do is put the layers in, like a constructing a house. Put the foundations in impressively, that you never need to go back and undo the foundations. I've been in organizations where they've jumped so many stages and they've missed putting the underlying platform in, including the right people, and they've kept people in positions that they shouldn't be there for too long.
Can I ask on that point? Steve Jobs, famous leader type, and people love to talk about him. He had this famous little clip of saying, we got to a stage at Apple where we basically thought we needed to hire management. Let's bring in management to get serious. He said what happened was, we had a lot of managers who knew how to manage, but they didn't know how to do anything. And I think they essentially just reversed that. What was your gut feel that's really going on there? He probably just had the leadership already in place. They just needed to upskill this kind of official management style, but actually it was the wrong move to get professional managers in, because that's the other side of that coin, right? You bring in these layers, but are you just putting in these layers like they're Lego bricks and there's not really an integration there? Or you haven't, or maybe that's the mistake. People don't really look at that person and say, how do we actually integrate this person? Almost like acquiring a business. How do we make this part of 1 + 1 = 3, not, the other way around?
Well, I think there's a huge misunderstanding that bringing in management levels, which is a very traditional concept of having boxes and structures. I have a problem with it because in many ways it creates an ordered society where everyone sits in little compartments and like a nice little organized supermarket. That doesn't mean to say it's organized. It just means that you can show where people all sit. What we should be focusing on is whatever structure is formed, and whichever employees or positions evolve, it should be fundamentally to achieve efficacy, skill, and accuracy. And good managers focus on that relentlessly. You know, I've had managers say, oh, I'm so busy, I need more staff. And you go, look, hang on a minute, think about it. Your entire job, if it's not somewhat a paradox, that your entire job is to be efficient. And you go get hires, I need 3 this, 4 of that, 5 of this. And then you catch up with them a year later, they've still got the same problems. And actually realizing it's not anything more complicated. They don't know what to do, so they hire more people, hoping that will kind of solve the problem. What they need to do, go back to being introspective, is, do I know how to figure this out? And often when you have big problems, you need fewer people. You need to have just better quality people. I had one experience of one chief exec that in the time of crisis, he didn't go to any board members. He went to external people to get advice in the most telling time. I've even had people that I no longer work with have called me with a difficult problem, and I go, I don't work with you anymore. They go, no, but you're the only one who could give us some sense on this. And I said, but you should have people around you. And so I think there's a danger between putting people in boxes, because it creates the perception that we're getting organized. And I think regulation has a big part to play. We need to blame someone. We need someone accountable. And I am all for accountability, so let's not downplay that. But if anything, you want a structure that promotes fewer layers, because I would say it's most important that the chief exec in any company can do a walkabout and can walk to any place within the company. I have friends who are chief execs, and they say, I get the most information, just walk around talking to people at all different levels and just ask them, hey, what's going on? Talk to me about your business, talk to me about your department. What are your top 3 priorities you're working on right now? And he said, and one of my friends who's chief exec says that what the people are telling him on the shop floor is different from what is being said in the middle management meetings. So I think there's a real importance, in my experience, that building up high caliber professionals and having fewer decision makers, but not tyranny or something despotic. You need to have good distribution of power, but what you don't want is decision making to be slow. Decision making needs to be fast, but information needs to be presented in a factual manner so they can make the right decisions. I've sat on committees that are so large, so elaborate, that nobody makes any decisions. All they agree is when's the next meeting going to be.
And this is maybe more of a risk at a public company.
Yes, because there's this, I don't know where it's come from, but this perception that oversized governance creates governance. I think it actually wrecks it. I think you need to have very clear points of reference, who's in charge, and you need to be able to make decisions quickly. Look, if there's a problem in the company, you need the right people around there to deal with it. I think the problem is that as a company grows, it's very hard, nothing picking on you, for a chief exec to know that you've got to delegate stuff and pass it to capable hands and they will deal with it. The hard thing of being, having so much to do and so many people to look after, you end up getting involved in everything. And I think one of the responsibilities or sacrifices a chief exec has to do is always make sure the content of his or her job description is kept very streamlined, because they have to be functioning at the extreme level of professionalism. That if you're taking a crazy made up example on the top of my head, all right, you're on an aeroplane and you're going through a very bumpy turbulence, and the pilot seems to be more preoccupied with working out serving food in terms of the steward role rather than flying the plane. I know it's a crazy example, but my point is you want him or her sat right at the front with all the right information dealing with the particular crisis. I've dealt with chief execs who are concerned with the most inconsequential detail, and they just want to be...
But they're thinking about their reputation, they're thinking about their ego, right? In that scenario.
But I think what they should be concerned about is...
the end goal.
The end goal, but that doesn't mean to say that they do not have a very close relationship with everybody in that company, the ability to walk around, and they may not know everybody by name, but everybody needs to know who they are. I think that's most important. And they need to be able to let people know, or certainly give the very strong indication that they are genuinely listening to what employees are talking about in terms of issues.
So I think on that regulation point, because there's similarities with even how you run a country and you run a business, transparency. I think, as you say, if you have more people, too many chefs in the kitchen, you're not going to get things done. It's even going to just cause a lot of issues. So you can have someone who can, be at the focal point and be empowered to make quick decisions. But there needs to be transparency in what they said, what they did to someone at least, right? And I guess that's what a public company is all about, and accountability. So that's what I've tried to live like. But I think that you have to be careful because you're too transparent, people use it against you. So it's going to be a perennial problem. How do you get the best of both worlds? But again, accountability, having a strong sense of accountability comes back to, well, what are you actually trying to do and how are you going to measure yourself? So we've had so many different things like at different times be issues, and we've had like people, oh, what about your turnover? Because I never even thought about turnover. Like I've never thought about it until someone said it once, and it became a bit of a recurring theme. I'm like, I just know what we're trying to do, and I just know people like yourself, we're just growing and putting in layers, and you either fit or you don't. And at the end of the day, like we need to self-calibrate, but we need to be objective about the metrics, about what we're doing, and the work we can always do is to be clear about what we're trying to achieve. And at the end of the day, it just isn't a thing because I'm very clear about what I'm trying to achieve. But I can see someone, with that transparency being like, well, hang on, what about that? And he said, well, in my head, my accountability is to, key staff retention. Obviously, you can't be losing your top staff, but ultimately revenue growth and growth in the business. That's what we're here to do. It's like some people seem to think that I don't know, people in businesses are trying to create like a utopic environment for, I don't know, living life. At the end of the day, it's got a very singular purpose, which is to generate profit, obviously within the confines of the law, and to take care of people. Otherwise, you won't get the most of them. It's all calibrated to that. Like, if things are going badly and you're a complete prick to your staff and it's a horrible place to leave, then you won't make money. It may not be overnight, but eventually you will lose money. Like, not being funny, I've been a part of organizations like that. It goes downhill very, very quickly. And it happens all of a sudden. And like you say, like, what happened 24 hours ago? We were great. Yeah, but you weren't paying attention to where what real flaws were. The element of like, I know transparency and accountability are the most key things in leadership, but then I do also see how they can be abused. You've got to kind of agree at some level, like, okay, but what is the real metric here? Because you can't bring in other random metrics and be like, well, you had 20 offsides this season, so you must not have a very good defense. Sorry, you must not have a very good attack. It's like, why are you bringing that in? It's about scoring goals. It's about winning matches. Why are you know what I mean? Taking some random point in the spirit of transparency and using it against me. You
well, I think on that there, I do sense, I think the other thing is to look at it that every move, every decision, everything you do has a corresponding
reaction. Every action has
corresponding risk,
yeah.
or benefit. There are these are choices that we make, and as long as we do not think in a myopic way that it was a good decision because there were no corresponding implications. Every decision you take has a corresponding factor to it, and good decision makers evaluate that bit ultimately. Right. They look at what in my experience is just the way I learned this, that someone said to me, what's the difference between a top snooker player versus a middle level snooker player? And I said, I don't know. He said, I'll tell you what, the top person is 7 shots ahead. The mid-level is concentrating one ball at a time. Okay? And that's a different, in any advanced activity, being advanced in business, is being comfortable dealing with the way this is going to play out, or potentially, and being comfortable with that. You know yourself in trading, you're analyzing that constantly. You're looking where things may go, what they might do. That's the same, if you like, principle with running a company. You're making choices. We don't know what the future will bring. We don't know what's going to happen, but we can make choices that we believe are going to put us in the best position.
But the best position needs to be defined though, doesn't it? So we're going to say the best position is this. These are the metrics we're heading to. And you almost have to have blinkers to some degree on everything, because you know things are going to pop up that are going to be potential issues, or people are going to want to define as issues. But as long as you've defined quite clearly what you're trying to achieve.
I think you have to be, sorry to talk over you, I think you have to be comfortable with the uncertainty and being comfortable with risk.
Yeah.
And I think there's this, I remember working in a public company where, I'm perhaps being a little bit satirical here, but there is almost like that risk is bad.
Yeah.
And I say, risk is good. Risk is inevitable. You're making a confusion between being reckless and dealing with risk. I mean, it's the calculation of risk. And as a business grows, I mean, for some reason, people seem to think that change is by choice. Every day I look in the mirror, I have changed. I'm getting older. I don't look like I did when I was 20. I can't stop it. But you can do certain things to preserve. Yeah. I heard a quote the other day that, a bit of a bizarre one, that the food you eat represents your optimism of your life expectancy. Okay? Now let's apply that weirdly to the decisions you take in business. The decisions you take reflect your optimism of how long you're going to go, how much better you're going to be than the competition. Every single away day, every single strategic event I've ever had, every conversation I've had with the top of management of company, all have the same agenda, which is, how can we increase sales, reduce costs, be number one, be the best? And they always denounce the competition. And so everyone's talking the same stuff. The difference is the implementation of that. And I think it's also being comfortable with setting standards and being very specific about those standards and not budging on those standards. It's very hard in running a business because human beings, and would you believe it, one of them, our life changes. People's personal change, people are going through change. What you wanted at 20 may not be the same at 60. Yeah. And
young man's wishes.
So I think people, as a leader of a large enterprise, which, your enterprise is getting bigger by the minute, that we have to recognize the variables, is that even employees on the day they come in interview may be a different person in 10 years time. But and frankly, it's being able to deal with that I think it's the adaptability, it's being versatile.
I had another quote, which is, your company is either growing or it's in managed decline. That's effectively what you're saying, the adaptability and wanting to grow all the time. People don't like that. They get cushy, or some people don't like that, and they don't realize if you don't change, you're not in step with the world, basically.
When I heard, which I love from the private equity days, was that anyone can overtake a stationary object.
Right. Yeah.
So you've got to keep moving. I mean, and also prepared to take risk and realizing that you may get it wrong. But as long as you recognize when it's an error. But this sort of security blanket where nothing changes, it's a state of permanence, that it's this immutable existence, that you come to work and tomorrow is the same as today and today is the same as yesterday. That is just like fantasy talk. Every day brings another challenge. We could have anything that could happen. I mean, 2 years ago we had the whole world in meltdown, in sort of government restrictions, you can't come to the office, everybody's under this pandemic situation, and no one predicted that. I would say, well, very few people were very loud about that prediction, but we talk about it as, it's just one of those things. I was right in the middle of a very large company when that all happened. No risk professional ever put that in their enterprise risk model. They do now, but they didn't at the time. So there are things that happen, circumstances that change all the time. And in my view, running a successful business, and truly successful, is the ones that adapt better in those circumstances.
On everything we've discussed and your experience, where does that leave us at Onyx, for people to succeed here, people to come in here? What are the main principles that are going to drive us forward, do you think?
For the short time I've been here already, it's quite clear to see it's building the team up. I said to you when we had that event offsite, that my job is not to be concerned too much with whether you have a strategy. I don't have the skills you have, but one thing I can assist with is making sure we have the people to execute that strategy. And it's a big job to make sure in every facet, every department, every area, we have enough traders, we have enough people in the research, media, the administration teams, ops, risk, to have not just the right number, but the right people. It rolls off the tongue so easily, but to do it, given what I've just spoken about before with all of these changes, for you to have an optimal team structure, not too big, not too small, never undersized, never oversized, never underskilled, anything like that, is a constant job. And that means we've got to smash the recruitment. We've got to be fantastic with onboarding. We've got to be very good at aligning up people's responsibilities proportionally to their skill set, but giving them the right space to grow according to their ambitions and drive and what our requirements are, and lining those up. And we will lose people, it's inevitable, but we want that down to being just one of those things that is quite healthy. It's like a normal attrition. What I don't want is to lose high quality professionals, and we have to make sure we keep, everybody should be important, and we want to be keeping everyone tight. And there's a lot of competition out there that when we produce a superb trader who comes through our academy and becomes a superstar, that we just gift wrap that to the competition and they just take that person, and we've done all the hard preparatory work, as indeed the individual has, and making sure that we develop that relationship with those people. They never want to leave because everything's here. Why would you want to leave? Because everything is here. There's nothing out there that even matches it. That's what my job is, and it sounds easy to say it, but that's a 50-year objective.
I was going to say, what's that going to take, 6 months or?
At your standards, I've got to be done by this afternoon.
John, thanks so much for coming on. That was fascinating discussion. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
And for everyone else out there, that was a special episode, but we'll be back to kind of market discussion for the next. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed that as I did. See you again soon.